Sebastian. African cities in the face of climate change, what challenge and what the resilience? Thank you, Sebastian.
Dear colleague, dear friend, thank you very much. Are the speakers online? Okay. Madame Nidia, Mr. Dom Suma, and Madame Gamwera, are you here?
Hello, Julian. Sebastian, sorry.
Oh,
I'm online. Thank you.
Yes, hello, Sebastian. Gertrude is online.
Okay, and Mr. Dom Suma? Okay, I think his mic is closed. To start with, I was very interested for sure and impressed by the quality of the first speakers. And I was glad to hear the term Renaissance. And it rings the bell for me from the W.E.B. Du Bois in the 60s, which described his living in Accra and started to describe the major stakes of African cities at that time. And it seems to me like the question of cities related to climate change in Africa epitomizes the main challenges for the continent. I mean, how to promote equality, better governance, and how to deal for sure with climate change and especially flooding and warm waves, etc. And I'm very glad, sure, and I can wait to hear from your insights on the topic. Maybe Madame Nidia, if you want to start with.
Well, thank you, Sebastian. Ladies and gentlemen, I think let me just go straight into my statement because I think we're quite out of time. First of all, congratulations to the team on the launch of the first edition of the Africa 2050 Forum. It is indeed a remarkable achievement, and I see it as a significant milestone in fostering dialogue, collaboration, and reflection on sustainable development practices in Africa. Together, let us seize this moment to inspire change and accelerate progress towards resilient cities and communities in across Africa. And together, I'm sure we can build a future where sustainable development empowers African cities to thrive and adapt. In Africa, our urban landscapes are evolving rapidly. As you all know, Africa is the youngest continent with the biggest yet to be built urban areas. And we are expecting, or rather projections indicate that we are yet to be faced with unprecedented challenges in the years to come. We've seen the interaction of climate change, rapid urbanization, and social inequalities among some of the complex issues which we must confront in our region. And today, I think I would wish to focus not on the challenges. I think in my line of work, working with the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction, and based in the Regional Office for Africa, I have really had quite a bit in terms of challenges, and I'll probably leave that to my colleagues to focus on if they wish. But I'd like to put more emphasis on the solutions and the approaches that we must use if we're going to pursue resilience in our region. So first of all, I would like to start with the issue of resilient infrastructure. We know that African infrastructure, and I will not go into the political aspects on this, but we know most of our infrastructure, most of our cities were built many, many years ago and were not built for the kind of populations that are in there today. We know, for example, my city, I'm from Nairobi, and we know our city was actually built by accident, if I can say. And today we see a population of about 4 million people per day coming in and out of the city. So you can imagine the stress that we're putting in the existing infrastructure that was not built for that kind of people. And more so, we're seeing a lot of unplanned settlements and a lot of unplanned buildings that are built by, how can I say this, the economically challenged, the sector of the population that is only now trying to meet their basic needs and moving from the rural areas to urban. So of course, they don't have the resources to build like resilience housing. And of course, the impact is not just condensing and increasing the density, the population density, and more hiking the risk levels, but in the sense they also contribute to the the wear and tear of the infrastructure that is within the city. It comes to wash facilities, the roads, and so on. So resilient infrastructure is not an option for us. Rather, it has to happen. And investing in this kind of infrastructure is actually very important for us. When we talk about resilient infrastructure, we are referring here to the designing and construction of the buildings, the roads, and utilities that can withstand the growing population as well as the forces of nature. We do encourage that we have to, look at resilient design principles, looking at modern technology and the advancement that has gone into the engineering world, and look at this and implement designs that provide us with earthquake-resistant structures, flood-resistant infrastructure, so that we can ensure that the safety and longevity of our urban environments is actually guaranteed. Furthermore, it is crucial to consider the location of our infrastructure. We have seen situations where now several cities in Africa are actually considering not just retrofitting, but actually moving entire city populations because they no longer can manage to, control the risks that they are faced with. On top of that, we have to also ensure that much as we are developing land use planning policies, we must also accompany this with strict adherence to them. My second point would be on early warning systems. And generally, early warnings empower individuals and communities to take proactive action in the face of impending threats. To effectively respond to disasters, however, we must, implement robust systems that also that encompass rather not just the collection of weather data, but also the translation of this data into a language that people can understand and take action on. We have to ensure that while we are investing in the technologies, we are also establishing efficient dissemination channels to the communities and giving them the capacities that they need to actually be able to prepare in a timely manner. According to the Global Commission on Adaptation, actually, it says that, or they published and said that giving just a 24-hour notice of an impending hazardous event can actually reduce damage by more than 30%. And they go ahead and say that investing in just about 800 million US dollars in such systems, and especially in developing countries, which we have 33 countries of those in our region, would prevent losses of between 3 to 16 billion dollars annually. So you see that early warning systems have a big space when it comes to resilience building in our region. But we also see that with this knowledge, we still are experiencing very huge gaps, and especially in the seeds and the developing states in our region. And this more encouraged or caused the UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, to actually launch an initiative, a global initiative, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, the Early Warnings for All initiative that calls for the coverage, 100% coverage of the Earth by 2027 with early warning systems. So this initiative is fully aligned to the 2030 global agenda. I'm sure this is one of the questions that may come from the plenary, but just so you know that it is fully aligned to the 2030 agenda, and everybody has a role to play in the establishment of the systems. My third point is on community preparedness. And let me begin by saying that resilience actually begins at the community level. Educating this community production, strategies, and so on is actually important for them to be able to prepare for potential disasters and also mitigate the impact of these disasters. We have to foster a culture of preparedness where communities can actually develop their own emergency response plans. They can establish the communication networks and acquire the necessary knowledge and resources from among themselves. Engaging communities in resilience building is not only to enhance their ability to respond and recover, but it also strengthens the social cohesion and collective
It was disconnected.
sorry, I think my connection died at
Oh.
some point. Are we back?
Yeah.
Okay, so on community engagement, in our region, we have, when we talk about the disaster context, we also have a lot of underlying issues, underlying drivers, I would call them, such as poverty, illiteracy, access to social services, which exacerbate the impact that some of these hazards can have on such people. And so we have to take this into consideration and make sure that we're actually engaging communities in every development agenda if we're to make progress. Because it is at this level that the approach of leave no one behind becomes a reality. We must ensure that we include everyone in the planning and implementation of the development agenda. And this includes mainstreaming gender issues. Yes, gender had to appear there. And of course, including persons with disability. We have to ensure that through data, collection of data and its management, we are promoting disaggregation. And by disaggregation, I mean disaggregating all population-related data into sex, age, and disability. Because this way then we can better understand the intersectionality of factors that contribute to, more impact to the most at risk in our communities. And yes, we no longer use the most vulnerable, we use most at risk. My next point, and please do let me know when I'm running out of time. My next point is on institutional capacity. We have seen very many calls, including from the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction and many other international frameworks, calling for strengthening institutional capacities, and especially when it comes to the African context. And this is very key because through our institutions, whether it's through the national agencies, local governments, other ministries, and so on, we're able to effectively plan, implement, and coordinate all initiatives, including resilience building initiatives. And so this involves that we establish robust governance structures, we enhance coordination mechanisms, and we foster collaboration between the different levels of government and also with the stakeholders. We have to build these capacities to ensure that, even as we look at the development agenda, we are integrating risk management or risk-informed development into all the development, because as we say, Africa still has about 60% of urban areas that are expected by 2050 yet to be built, and this is a key opportunity for us to get it right from the beginning. My other point is actually on private sector participation. Our region has seen a very strong engagement when it comes to private sector, and especially in the development agenda. We've seen the role of private sector being very important when it comes to provision of basic social services, employment, and this makes the engagement in the resilience agenda crucial. By actively participating in resilience building efforts, businesses can contribute their expertise, resources, and innovation to create sustainable and adaptable urban environments. The engagement of private sector can range. There's many ways to engage them, from them investing in resilient infrastructure through private-public partnerships, as well as promoting sustainable practices and responsible business operations, ensuring that we have collaboration between governments and private sector and communities. We can spread the risks and the costs associated with resilience initiatives to make them more affordable and make more business sense. And so we have to ensure also that as we are engaging our businesses, they need to prioritize the use of sustainable materials, energy efficiency, and locate the operations in safe places away from natural and technological hazards. And finally, I would like to talk about coordination and collaboration. Building resilience requires coordination and collaboration across different sectors and actors. And I think this has been seen from the previous panel, where we have quite a range of partners, and congratulations to you again. We must break down the silos and foster a culture of information sharing and collaboration. By working together, we can pool our expertise, our resources, and experiences to create a resilient region, because now we're talking about Africa, that benefits all its inhabitants. In closing, I would like to extend a call to action, and this is a call to all the partners and organizations and stakeholders in the room who are committed to sustainable development in Africa. I would invite you to join forces with us, and not just UNDRR, but also a number of other partners who've come together to develop a partnership approach that is called the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative. This initiative offers a roadmap where cities and communities can actually progress along the resilience journey, and has identified some milestones. It advocates for comprehensive approaches that integrate sustainability, inclusivity, and climate action and disaster risk reduction. By building city resilience in Africa requires collective action, collaboration, and partnership. And this is why I implore each of you to join forces with us. And of course, I would be happy to take this conversation forward at a later stage. Together, we can forge innovative solutions and share knowledge and resources and create a ripple effect of positive change across the continent. As I close, let me say that I'd like to also congratulate you once again on the successful launch of this forum. And I look forward to seeing your dedication and vision continue to inspire action across the region. And I am confident that the impact of Africa 21 and its partners will continue to make a positive change in our African continent. Thank you, and over to you, Julian. Sebastian.
very
I don't know
much.
why I keep calling you Julian. I'm sorry. Thank you, Sebastian.
That's right. Thank you very much. Madame Gabuera, would you have first reaction?
Thank you very much, Sebastian, and I'd like to thank my colleague. I'd like to thank my colleague Isabel for such a comprehensive presentation. Perhaps I'll start off with a self-introduction. Of course, I'm Gertrude Rose Gamwera, and I work with the East African Local Governments Association in East Africa. Our headquarters are in Arusha, Tanzania, and we do associate with the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative, for which we really thank UNDRR for. I'll also join Isabel in congratulating you on holding this forum, which is quite essential and vital to the voices, elevating the voices for our cities in Africa, but also East Africa. Of course, what Isabel has spoken of is something we've always worked together as members of the initiative on, and these are realities and facts in terms of what needs to be done when it comes to matters of resilience. But maybe before I get that there as well, I wanted to kind of contextualize our understanding of issues concerning climate change and building cities resilience within the perspective of the East African cities context. So we are coming from a place where we have a very rapid rate of urbanization, and this was witnessed right from the 2000 period 2000 to 2018 up to today. It continues to grow, and it's not less than 4.5%, which is a very huge rate in terms of how we should be managing our governance systems and our interventions around managing the urbanization process. But when we look within the region of East Africa, of course, infrastructure, which Isabel has mentioned as part of the opportunities available to address this issue, is one of the key concerns within our region as we face and take on this urbanization trade head-on. And definitely from the angle of local governments, it is a serious need, because we are evolving from a rural setting to an urban setting. And this means there's a lot of huge investment called for to modernize and provide the services and infrastructure necessary to cater for the urban needs, which includes housing, which includes things that are really around industrialization. What does this mean for the cities and for the climate? It means we are witnessing quite a sizable amount of environmental degradation, and therefore it's important that we put in play strategies and frameworks for addressing this and building the resilience of cities to be able to handle this. So definitely infrastructure is something that we must look at, because if we're going to build resilient systems, we must be able to help the local governments, which I work with, be able to plan ahead and avoid scenarios where they get to be more responsive than impactful in terms of providing services. We need them to have better urban planning policies, which will cut across and involve issues of climate mitigation as well. And also we need to have help them come up with early warning planning systems, but also in being able to conduct emergency responses when it comes to issues of effects of the rapid urbanization coming on board. We also see issues of capacities of our local governments to have the right human resource technical skills in place, the right tools in place, and of course, the right governance structures. When we talk about local governments, definitely you can't escape going into the governance structures. And what does that mean for us? It means if you're going to put and position local governments in their rightful place around resilience building, you should be able to invest in strong devolution and decentralization policies as a prime. There should be that national contextualization of being able to devolve responsibilities, but as you devolve, you equip these local governments with the right resource and tools. And if these are provided as anticipated, as foreseen by the policies and commitments, then definitely we are able to witness local governments being more effective when it comes to zeroing in or drawing in a deep dive into the areas of what we're talking about today, issues of climate change management and building their resilience. So definitely governance, very crucial. Allowing communities, Isabel talked about communities, devolution and decentralization in local governments, it's about community. So the local governments is a vehicle through which these communities can be able to participate, to be included in decision-making on issues that matter to them most. So definitely, if you're going to bring on board the whole of society approach, engage the communities, then leverage, jump onto this local government vehicle, make it strong enough so that it can be responsive and will be able to take the mileage that we need in terms of handling issues of resilience, issues of climate change management. Okay. I thought I would also touch on existing opportunities within our region as we talk about this. And Isabel, I'm going back to in responding to your presentation. I'm looking at aspects of what policy regimes, when we talk about coordination and collaboration, existence at both national and local levels. And we start from the very top level. As East Africa, we draw from the African Urban Agenda. And from that, when we come to the issues of climate and resilience, we see policies like the East African Community Climate Change Policy coming in to provide the overall guide in the region to the nation member states to champion that direction of climate change and disaster risk. So you find that most of the nation member states are responsive to this policy and have come up with their own policies and also structures in terms of coordination committees, which cascade down to the local government level. So these are opportunities through which to work with local governments and the national level, specifically with local governments being able to be responsive, but also building in the national local cooperation and improved coordination mechanisms, which we can leverage if we are going to have strategic interventions that reinforce existing actions around building resilience and strengthening local government roles in climate change. Perhaps maybe I could stop there for a while because this was a response to Isabel, and give it back to you, Sebastian.
Okay, thank you very much. This has been really interesting. It seems like the governance is really at the core. And if something is to be missed, it's on governance. What do you think?
Definitely, governance is a big issue. Everything is about governance, and we increasingly, I think it's something we should focus on in terms of building cities' resilience when we want them to be effective actors or stakeholders in this process. I mean, local governments, it's really about governance. Nation member states agree that they are going to include their citizens, their communities in the governance of their affairs. And the best modality that has been chosen to date on the continent in Africa is decentralization and devolution. So definitely we have to make these governance systems around decentralized structures at subnational level work for the communities. There should be democratic processes of election. There should be inclusive participatory mechanisms where consultations are bottom up. And we need to see that the voices of the citizens are in there, informing and influencing the actions that cities take concerning their welfare and concerning the kind of services that need to be prioritized for their well-being.
Okay, thank you very much. Madam Nidia, would you have any more comments on governance?
Yes, Sebastian, thank you. Actually, in fact, if you would notice, I did not mention finance. I did not mention financial capacities at all, because we have seen that there are, funds and global mechanisms that are available for local governments and national governments. But unfortunately, our region has not been able to take advantage of these. And I will not say exactly why, because I don't know. But one of the things is that most of these, in fact, all of the financial mechanisms that exist require for us to have systems, finance systems that are accountable. So we have to be able to prove accountability in our financial management systems. And unfortunately, because governance in general in our region is, we have very limited governance or very limited good governance examples, let me give it like that. We've seen that now this also has a ripple effect in terms of what resources are we able to access, and also how are we able to manage these resources to ensure that they're actually put in the purpose for which they were accessed for in the first place, you see? And so, yes, I agree with Gertrude that governance is indeed a key issue. And even looking at the 4 priorities for action of the implementation of the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, the first priority is actually on governance. It calls for strengthening institutional capacities, ensuring that we have coordination mechanisms, ensuring that people understand their roles and responsibilities, and that all the approaches that are put in place are actually comprehensive, calling for mainstreaming across different sectors, across different ministries, that we're all talking about the same issue, that is resilience. Because as you know, Sebastian, resilience is not it's not a one thing, it's not a thing, it's a cross-cutting issue. And given that it is a cross-cutting issue, and with similar issues that we've seen, that when you say that gender mainstreaming is a cross-cutting issue, anything that is made to be the business of everyone ends up being the business of nobody. No one becomes responsible or accountable for the establishment of gender principles or ensuring that we are integrating gender. And it's the same thing with resilience. Because it's a cross-cutting issue, then we have to make sure that we are conscious and consciously pursuing indicators and key performance indicators, especially across different ministries, to show that we are all actually contributing to this agenda in a one kind of approach way for each government.
What sounds very unfulfilling for me is that this twofold strategy based on vision on one hand and a bottom-up approach is brand new, because for a very long time, it seemed from my very short view that big projects in Africa were driven by big vision, for better or worse, but sometimes for the worst for the population. And in this case, we have the two together, which is quite new. And as in Europe, we are facing major issues for cities. This is really interesting. And to be quite provocative, it's like we are in the forum Europe 2K50, and we are looking for solutions for major problems in cities for Europe. And I would say, what would be your takes for European cities from your own African perspective on this question of governance, especially?
Gertrude, do you want to go first?
Beck, sorry.
Well, yes, like I could share my view. Well, within the context of European cities from the African perspective, we find that when it comes to matters of governance, it is quite interesting that there is an appearance or semblance of more democratic approaches, where we see cities, in this case, there is an opportunity for them to have stronger voice, and they're more strongly engaged in driving the affairs of their communities, working with the people. We see the people in leadership. But again, it is quite interesting that even if that is the case, when it comes to the issue of resources, resource provisions, we seem to be singing the same song, cities in Africa and cities in Europe. There is an issue around commitment to empower cities to take lead within the meaning of the mandates that have been given to them as devolved entities responsible for public service delivery. And even when it comes to project implementation, we were a bit concerned as cities, and I think this is shared as well with the European cities, that we see preference to have the national governments and perhaps the international NGO stakeholders take the lead and drive the project implementation process, which is kind of exclusive to an extent of the community. So we want to see more of that cascading down and seeing more localization processes taking form and shape when it comes to project management and implementation. on the ground. So maybe over to you, Isabel, to kind of weigh in on this issue as well.
Passionating. And from this, how to foster cooperation between cities among Africa?
Yeah, I think it's something that we've always pushed for as networks of associations, because we feel that there are elements where we have a lot to learn as cities in Africa and in East Africa in particular from the global North. And therefore, we encourage and networks such as East African Local Governments Association provide platforms for twinnings and peer-to-peer exchange and learning between cities in Europe and cities in Africa. So that is something that is quite high on our agenda as cities in Africa and East Africa. And we hope and assure, we have examples, we do have existing examples. Like I do know that through partnerships and networks of associations in the Netherlands, we do have strong twinnings between cities in East Africa and cities in the Netherlands. And these are actually providing quite impactful results on ground in terms of helping them do better planning processes, helping them engage into better mobilization of communities and building more community ownership of projects that are going on, which builds into the sustainability equation and guarantees that even after there's such relationships, there is at least a bit of continuity in terms of the deliverables of better service and quality of life for the communities. So yeah, there is that aspect of learning and knowledge management and exchange between cities in Europe and cities in Africa that needs to be explored and promoted further.
Thank you very much. And I appreciated your very pragmatic view on private sector and how to include the private sector in this big trend. And can you explain a bit more how the private sector is essential to this transition?
Well, on the issue of the private sector, I will speak from the angle still of our own East African experience. We, as part of our decentralization policies, we have come up with a new pillar. We call it the sixth pillar, and it's about local economic development. And within that pillar of decentralization, cities and local governments are encouraged to build public-private partnerships with the private sector to, invest more and promote local development by a wider lens whereby all actors and stakeholders in the community are involved, private, non-private, everybody should be involved. So we are coming up with policies. Most of the governments have come up with policies that inform the creation of frameworks for public-private participation. And we see this filtering through areas like health, areas like water service provisions, and increasingly as well, we are seeing a little bit more of actors from the private sector coming on board to help manage climate mitigation issues, particularly when it comes to areas of technology. However, this is something that is still very, very in its nascent stages. We need to grow the relationship because there's the element of trust. The private sector has its new unique approach, and we know how local governments operate like government public service delivery institutions. So issues of accountability, which Isabel touched on, are very, very crucial and prioritized by private sector when they're into discussions with our cities and local governments. And we work with them because I know networks have come up with certain charters that require local governments and cities to be compliant on issues of accountability. So it is an area because it provides potential for alternative funding streams for local governments, both in terms of project development, but also service delivery. So I think it is also a very important area. I think I looked in a little bit in the beginning and I tapped, I think, something around AFCTA. It's very important because if we are going to have cities and local governments on board, they should be in that position where they are in charge of own resources, they can generate own resources on which they can make own decisions for investment. And that is the only way we can see the growth of public-private partnerships and propel local economic development into making its contribution towards trade and regional development and growth. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, associate and make sure that every actors are compliant in this long-term view. Okay, Madame Nigia, on the private sector, maybe?
Yeah, thank you, Sebastian. So on private sector, through the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative, first of all, before I get into the private sector, let me just talk generally about how we're engaging stakeholders. And this, by stakeholders here, we mean any entity, whether it's government agencies or private sector or NGOs or CSOs or even UN agency, any institution, including academia, any institution that has a mandate or an interest to actually support local governments in the resilience agenda is actually welcome to join the Making Cities Resilient 2030 initiative. It's voluntary, non-obligatory, no liabilities to you. And so what we're trying to do is to create a pool of resources where local governments can directly access, not just the partners, but they also can access each other. So you can find that local governments, instead of waiting for us as UNDRR to put them into contact with a city that can support them in their journey, whether it's through twinning or peer exchanges, they actually can go directly through the dashboard and filter and see which cities are committed on the same focus areas that I am. And that way they're able to connect each other. We're trying to remove the brokerage, quote unquote, because it's not really brokerage, but I don't have any other word to, to explain what it is. We're basically trying to break that middleman when it comes to cities contacting other cities. And through this dashboard, we've actually seen, cities that are willing to support others in the journey. So for instance, Matosinhos in Portugal has already expressed interest to support African Portuguese speaking countries in the resilience agenda. Whether it's through orientation workshops or through technical capacities, they're able to speak the same language, and that way they're able to actually help them progress. We've also seen a city like Potenza. I know it's a region. Is it a region or province? But the Potenza has also expressed interest to support at least 12 local governments in Africa to actually have a peer exchange and a learning kind of visit, so that they can go to Potenza and see what's there and learn from different areas when it comes to waste management or public participation or policies and plans or early warning systems and so on. And so you can see that through this, just having them in contact is already putting them in a better position when it comes to accessing information and the resources as well. Now, on private sector, we have seen in our region that private sector is the solution to problems that we did not know existed. For example, while in the city context, we talk about informal settlements, we more often than not forget that in the informal settlement itself, the rate of unemployment is the same or higher than what we are experiencing in the country. So for instance, if we say in the country we have about 30% unemployment rate, and here I'm being very optimistic, in the informal settlement, this number can actually be higher. And remember, even those that are employed within this context are already earning, like they're literally living at the poverty line. Okay, so where does this leave the people who need to access finances, because you need the finances to live? In the city context, you're not planting anything, so you have to pay for your food, you have to pay for where you live, you have to pay for your school and all the social amenities. And so what we've seen is that we have seen the microfinance institutions come up with financing mechanisms or mechanisms that include the financially excluded population, people who don't have a consistent pay, for example, who do not have a pay slip, who are not guaranteed to receive a pay tomorrow. They're able to access these resources, get some loans, start small businesses, and are able to continue like that through the guaranteeship of each other. So through them forming groups among themselves, they are already accountable to each other. And so this makes it possible for them to access the loans and the credit facilities without necessarily having any title deeds or any equipment or property that they can attach to these kind of resources. On a bigger scale, we have seen that the private sector are the muscle behind the development agenda. And when it comes to disaster losses, private sector actually takes the greater hit, because they lose supply chains, they lose the staff, they lose the market that they're selling to, and so on. And so through the investment of their own, within the business line, they're able to increase a little bit of investment to make sure that the infrastructure they're putting in place is resilient. in addition, as they design projects, because in our region, you'll find that we rarely have national agencies implementing roads and building and making buildings and so on. A lot of this work is actually done by private sector. And so going into partnership with them can ensure that they can go a little bit, take an extra mile to ensure that even the road that they're building has, say, for instance, improved drainage, looking at the forecasted increase in floods in the area, or they can come up with solutions that are trying to help the drainages in informal settlements, for example. An example is in Mozambique, where there's an informal settlement that they have been unable to move. And so the private sector came in place and built an infrastructure. I cannot only call it an infrastructure that is both a road and a drainage. Okay, so it's just a little bit slanted enough to make the runoff water, safely go away without damaging people's houses, but at the same time makes it accessible in case there is need for fire or an ambulance to traverse through. There's way to make it move. So through engaging with private sector, we actually can see a lot of innovative ideas that can actually be taken forward. Back to you, Sebastian.
From a very business perspective, this is real value creation, and that sounds very vivid. I think that Mr. Domsuma is now online.
Yes,
Mr.
I am.
Domsuma.
I'm there.
Glad to have you here. You had a chance to hear the first interventions?
Yes, I listen to the great ladies.
Okay. Okay, it's your turn.
Thank you very much. And first of all, let me congratulate you also for this very important initiative. I frame my thought in French, so maybe I will switch to that language for the ease of communicating them. Is that okay?
Sure.
Ok. Je voudrais, avant d'aller plus loin dans la discussion, poser le contexte du problème auquel nous nous attaquons. Le problème de la résilience des villes africaines. Mais à l'échelle globale, déjà, on sait, nous qui exerçons dans ce domaine du changement climatique, on sait que c'est une question, un enjeu global. Toutes les villes du monde sont concernées. Aussi bien du point de vue de l'adaptation que de l'atténuation, c'est-à-dire la réduction des émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Toutes les villes mondiales sont concernées. Ce d'autant plus que les villes sont un moteur important de l'économie. D'ailleurs, les statistiques montrent que plus de 80% du PIB mondial sont produits par les villes. Cela leur donne un rôle important. Et de par ce rôle également, nous constatons que les villes sont également une source importante d'émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Et de plus en plus, la population mondiale vit et vivra dans les villes, 70% d'ici 2050, ce qui est une grosse préoccupation. Et ça vient avec beaucoup d'implications en termes d'impact sur la qualité de l'air. Comme je l'ai dit, le système de transport en milieu urbain, surtout des systèmes non durables, produisent beaucoup de gaz à effet de serre. Impact sur la disponibilité et la qualité de l'eau, parce qu'on a besoin de l'eau et avec la forte demande en milieu urbain et également avec la forte production des déchets, la pollution de l'eau augmente et ça pose un problème de qualité et ça pose également un problème surtout de qualité de vie en milieu urbain. Et en ce qui concerne l'Afrique en particulier, la plupart des villes sont situées sur le littoral, surtout les mégapoles, les grandes villes africaines. Et surtout que nous vivons plus dans les villes, comme je l'ai dit, maintenant ça fait 50-50, 50% de population urbaine et 50% de population rurale. Mais cela va changer d'ici peu parce qu'avec l'urbanisation croissante et rapide des villes africaines, la tendance est beaucoup plus à ce qu'on ait plus des personnes en ville que dans les zones rurales. Et constatant comment les risques climatiques sont en train de devenir de plus en plus fréquents et intenses, la question devient plus qu'alarmante. Et on constate par exemple que les inondations en particulier dans les villes africaines sont la principale source de vulnérabilité climatique. Par exemple, en ce moment où moi je vous parle, la ville dans laquelle je suis, Abidjan, a connu hier, avant-hier, une forte inondation. Et beaucoup de familles sont affectées, beaucoup d'infrastructures ont été détruites. Et surtout dans des établissements humains anarchiques, les quartiers où les gens se sont établis sans suivre le plan d'urbanisation, sans aucune planification. Et là, je touche à un autre problème. L'absence de planification urbaine pose un sérieux problème, pose des risques. Et je crois que si on doit agir sur la résilience, c'est l'un des aspects, je vais en venir là-dessus, c'est de travailler sur la planification. Et en termes de défis, justement, les villes africaines font face à de nombreux défis, au-delà des défis climatiques que je vais aborder rapidement, mais il y a des défis en termes de développement urbain, tout simplement, d'étalement urbain, parce que les villes sont en train de s'étendre beaucoup plus au détriment des zones rurales, au détriment de l'environnement naturel, et ça pose souvent des problèmes tels que les glissements de terrain, parce que la végétation, le couvert végétal a été détruit pour établir des établissements humains. Et ça pose également des problèmes d'absence de défense naturelle contre les risques climatiques. Dans beaucoup de villes aujourd'hui, les espaces naturels ont été détruits, les zones protégées n'existent plus. À la place, ce sont des bâtis, etc. Et il y a plein de villes comme ça qui sont dans cette situation. Et l'autre aspect, c'est l'établissement dans des zones inondables, impropres à l'habitation. Une ville comme Dar es Salaam, aujourd'hui, la plupart des constructions anarchiques sont situées sur les berges des rivières et dans des zones inondables. Et c'est juste un exemple. La plupart d'autres villes sont dans la même situation. Une récente étude a montré que la majorité des 100 villes à croissance rapide ayant un risque climatique extrême se trouvent en Afrique. Et parmi ces villes se trouvent des villes comme Lagos, Addis Abeba, Luanda, Abuja, Abidjan, Dar es Salaam, etc. Malgré ces problèmes de vulnérabilité, il y a des opportunités, à mon avis, pour bâtir la résilience et d'améliorer la situation. Nous avons récemment étudié les contributions nationales déterminées que les pays africains ont soumises dans le cadre de l'accord de Paris. Et on a observé que 90% des CDN que les pays africains ont soumis ont porté le développement urbain comme étant parmi leurs priorités. Ça, c'est déjà quelque chose à saluer. Mais moi, je vois deux approches pour bâtir la résilience dans les villes africaines. L'approche upstream ou en amont, j'ai parlé de la planification, une nécessité d'avoir des politiques d'urbanisation et des plans directeurs et des réglementations municipales et de les faire respecter. Ceci pour éviter les constructions anarchiques et le non-respect des réglementations que nous observons dans beaucoup de villes africaines. L'autre aspect, moi je crois qu'il faut investir dans des secteurs à forte valeur de résilience. Par exemple, les infrastructures urbaines. On sait que la grande partie des infrastructures des villes africaines est à construire. Et il faut que nous saisissions cette opportunité pour les construire et bien, en les rendant résilientes et résistantes aux chocs climatiques. Et cela nécessite qu'on mette les municipalités au centre de l'action climatique. Pas seulement les municipalités, mais également les collectivités urbaines de façon générale. L'autre approche, c'est l'approche downstream, où je crois qu'il faut investir massivement dans les infrastructures et des infrastructures, pas seulement de transport, mais également le bâti, les bâtiments qui soient résilients aux inondations et également aux sécheresses. Il s'agit en particulier d'investir dans des villes qui soient capables de se protéger contre les risques, les vulnérabilités climatiques. Et en même temps, améliorer la qualité des services urbains et la qualité de vie de façon générale. Donc, c'est à ça que nous nous attelons au sein de la BAD. Si je vais en finir là. Nous avons un cadre stratégique qui nous permet d'appuyer aujourd'hui les villes africaines. Nous avons adopté un plan d'action sur le développement urbain durable sur la période 2023-2027 qui est en train d'être mis en œuvre. nous avons, vous avez mentionné la question sur le financement, nous avons établi un mécanisme de financement en 2019 qui s'appelle le Fonds pour le développement urbain et municipal, pour justement appuyer les villes africaines à bâtir leur résilience avec un accent particulier sur l'amélioration de la bonne gouvernance urbaine, la planification urbaine, comme je l'ai dit tout à l'heure, l'investissement dans les infrastructures et services urbains durables. Et nous avons 3 fenêtres de financement pour appuyer ce processus. Et l'un d'eux s'appelle Programme Ville africaine. L'autre, c'est un programme de préparation des projets urbains. Et l'autre aspect, c'est un mécanisme d'accès des villes au financement. Et à travers ces mécanismes, beaucoup de projets ont été financés, dont je vais mentionner juste le premier, le projet de transport rapide par bus à Dar es Salaam. C'est le premier que nous avons financé en 2015. Et après cela, beaucoup d'autres villes ont suivi, notamment Dakar, etc. Donc, pour finir, je voudrais dire que les villes africaines ont été bâties sans tenir compte des risques climatiques. Et je crois que ça, c'est un point qu'il faut corriger. Et il ne serait pas trop tard. Il nous faut donc repenser la conception et la construction des villes africaines dans une perspective de résilience climatique. Et cela à tous les niveaux, à commencer par la planification, comme je l'ai dit, mais aussi la conception des plans architecturaux et la mise en œuvre, la mise en place des établissements humains qui soient durables. Et ça, je crois que c'est le défi que les villes africaines ont à relever maintenant et dans les années à venir. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. De ce point de vue-là, on sent bien qu'effectivement, il y a une transition qui s'opère dans la prise de décision au profit des municipalités. Observez-vous des résistances?
Oui, c'est vrai, comme toute nouvelle initiative, il y a toujours des résistances. Mais je crois qu'aujourd'hui, les résistances sont en train de s'estomper en raison des problèmes que les populations vivent. On ne peut résister quand on voit l'ampleur du phénomène. Ce que moi j'ai vu hier et avant-hier ici à Abidjan, même si j'étais résistant à une transition, ma résistance s'estomperait parce que ce sont des vies humaines qui sont en jeu. Ce sont des économies qui sont en jeu. Ce sont des systèmes qui ont été complètement détruits. Et c'est parti pour peut-être des mois pour que ces systèmes soient restaurés. Donc, même les résistances, je crois que face aux défis, sont en train de s'estomper. Effectivement, il y a des résistances parce que les gens se plaisent dans les habitudes dans lesquelles ils se trouvent. Et moi, je crois que c'est au niveau des municipalités qu'il faut beaucoup travailler. Travailler avec les municipalités pour que les municipalités puissent faire appliquer les réglementations. Ne pas construire dans des zones inondables. Malgré qu'il existe des réglementations dans certaines villes là-dessus, nous constatons toujours que les gens construisent de façon anarchique dans des zones inondables et tout en sachant que la prochaine saison de pluie va venir tout balayer et ce sont des personnes humaines qui vont perdre leur vie. Donc, c'est vrai, il y a des résistances, mais de là où je suis, j'observe que dès qu'il y a des inondations, comme c'est le cas que j'ai évoqué, ces résistances-là s'effacent. Et comme on le dit souvent, les conséquences enseignent mieux que le conseil. Donc, quand on voit ces conséquences-là, on ne peut que penser à transiter vers des systèmes beaucoup plus durables.
Okay, Mr. Domsuma pointed out that with the major overturn of power between state and city governors, the resistance from the state's side is quite fading. Would you agree with this? Sorry, Madame Nejia or Madame Gawera?
Actually, it has been a long time coming because in the past we used to see a lot of resistance from national governments in terms of the whole agenda of making cities resilient. And most governments would say, you have to come through me. If you're bringing any initiative to my country, I have to approve, I have to guide, I have to be the one to implement. However, when you look at the reporting of the international frameworks, a lot of the action, rather all the action happens at the local level. But then this action does not get fed into the national processes in most cases. And so we never get to see the good practices that are being going on at the local level. So what we've done is over time, we have changed the narrative and said that national governments are also a key stakeholder when it comes to building city local resilience at the local level, so that they need to provide guidance, they need to provide the resources, but at the end of the day, the action needs to be taken by the cities themselves. And so now we have some ambience, can we call it an ambience, that is more pleasant for both local governments and national governments. But we're still not yet there, especially in the Anglophone side of things. It's a very, the democratic voices are very loud, which means then that I have to be heard and you have to be heard. And so we are both shouting and no one gets really to be heard, you see? And so it's a journey, but we are closer than we were 5 years ago for sure.
Okay, thank you very much. Madame Gamwera, maybe?
Yeah, I think what I may have to say does not differ a lot from what Isabel has said, really. We've made progress. We've come from a stage where it was strictly 100% nationally driven to now having experiences where we have local governments sitting on the table, represented through their networks, to input into and influence the policies and decisions being taken by government. And also we see commitments coming through. For example, in Uganda, we know that already there is a policy that they've begun to acknowledge the local governments and the cities into the frameworks, and all throughout the streaming, cascading down to local levels, you see structures that have a local government representative on board. And the same applies when local governments have to engage communities. They have their public platforms, their market day speech provisions where leaders engage with the citizens directly. So yeah, we see some progressive movement. And as East African Local Government Association, we are now taking this to the regional level, where we want to see the community, the regional bloc now, building onto the steps that have been taken at national level, and bringing the whole structure and voice of local governments within the regional level policy-making process. So I think we shall get there. And like I said in my earlier presentation, a bit of this is being influenced by even the topmost level at Africa level, where we see a bigger discussion around the Charter on Africa, the Charter on Decentralization for Africa. So when we have summits like at the level of Africa speaking, closer coordination, closer collaboration, and we have partners like UNDRR converging and mobilizing every actor into an initiative like MCR, and they are all acknowledging the role of cities and local governments. And I want to think that the recent experiences around COVID actually put another stamp on the importance of local governments, because at the end of the day, when the world had shut down, who was with the last person in the community? It was the local government leader. So this message was really sent through, and I'm sure now that national governments are rethinking their strategies around how to work with their communities better, and giving the space to cities progressively to take the center stage at the end of the day as implementers. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And just to add on that as well, Sebastian, I think even on the financing side, we see that the resistance that we saw in the past is now going away. For instance, we have been channeling our financing mostly through governments, through state-owned entities. But recently we have put forward a new initiative to provide guidelines for municipal access to finance. It has not been easy, because the old habits of everything going through the centralized governments. But slowly, even governments also are realizing that some municipalities have also a very important role to play. And we know for climate action in particular, we have to localize actions, especially for adaptation and resilience building. These are things that happen at local level. though decisions are made at central level, actions are taking place at local level, and we can't ignore that. And we see that, there is movement on, making sure that also communities, municipalities have also their say when it comes to making decisions on their own, on their own resilience, or on actions that are involving them directly. And I think in the future, we'll see more and more, movement towards that direction. Thank you.
Interesting. What I propose from now on is to take a question from the audience online and in the room. Is there any?
Yeah, thank you very much. I was just wondering, mayors of cities are fundamental, I guess, in this decision process. Are they, is just not the community each time, but I guess the mayor has to have some say in it as well. And how do they affect the outcomes?
Yes, maybe just a similar question. How other networks like C40, for example, for sustainable cities can also be some interesting partners. And you said the mayor, there is the des maires francophones, Association des maires francophones or Metropolis. So it's very interesting, this, these other networks.
Another question?
OK, on a une question de bâtiment qui vient de la ville de Kiwi, dans le sud-est de la République démocratique du Congo. Beaucoup de pays africains, dont la RDC et le Soudan, évoluent dans un contexte de guerre et depuis des potentialités et des atouts naturels. Comment contourner cette réalité pour qu'en 2050, l'Afrique émerge? Une autre question. What are disaster risk reduction initiatives already being done, especially in East Africa, and how successful are they? On a une autre question de Tuku Kariuki. Great presentation. What are the different ways being used in community engagement, and how can media help? And last question of Joshua. This is for Isabel. So resilient infrastructure, early warning system, community preparedness, institutional capacities, and coordination are important for building a climate resilient Africa, but they also require a lot of money. How and where to mobilize finance for their implementation? The private sector is often reluctant to invest in risky and uncertain large-scale infrastructure projects.
Who is first?
Okay, I'll go first. I hope I've understood the questions. I'll take on the question of the role of the mayor as his fundamental in decision making. And of course, this is true. This is very true. Even when we talk about cities and local governments coming on board, definitely we are looking at the office of the mayor providing the leadership in this. So mayors are quite important in decision making. Mayors take on the policy making role, they take on the representation role, they take on both at community level and also at the level of government and engagement. And they take on the they take on the oversight role, the oversight function of making sure that things that have been agreed upon and things that are to be implemented are actually taking place. So definitely this is a role that it should be in any case prioritized whenever we're coming up with any programs or pilots that involve cities and local governments, because without the mayor as an entry point, because recall that this is the person who has been given this mandate by the people. They are elected officials. Of course, we know that some are appointed in some instances, but even with that appointment comes the responsibility of speaking for the people, not self. So definitely investments in capacity building, leadership capacity building for these mayors in all forms of investments, even around climate change mitigation, becomes of paramount importance. It is these people that we as networks of associations advocate for in terms of representation. If you're going to have a climate change committee at national level, we say that there should be the face of a mayor sitting on that table, speaking and giving the experience of practice into that policy making. I also would go on to entities like C40 being partners and networks on interventions and projects. I'm sure that C40 is one of the key stakeholders under the MCR initiative. And these are people we work with in interlooping, collaborating, and coordinating initiatives around disaster risk resilience and reduction and climate change management. So whenever we come together as networks, we identify potential and interested interventions that are aligned. For example, policy making, conducting knowledge-made practices, data collection, sharing data and information. These are things that networks work together to bring to the local governments and cities as members, the capacity building interventions required. So yeah, as IALGA, I would quickly say we welcome discussions with CA40 on how much further within the meaning of the MCR initiative we can strengthen collaboration in the region. Disaster risk reduction strategies in East Africa that have taken place and what have been successful. This has been a kind of, like Isabel already shared, we are at the beginning stages of seeing that there is a collaborative and coordinated effort in this approach. Earlier on, it has been more of a responsive driven agenda, but today we are speaking to these cities and local governments about prevention more than responsiveness. And in that, what has been done so far is that we see that the governments have come up with policies around disaster risk reduction and management, and are now moving on to stages of localizing where they're translated into local policies by the cities and the local governments. And we see cities coming up with the related structures and systems to implement these agendas. This calls right now for a lot of investment in capacity building and making this operational. But for the moment, we must acknowledge that even without these structured systems, there have been those initiatives within communities and coordinated by cities prior, even when the government thought they were in charge. We saw cities coming in to help resettle people in times of disaster, to help plan ahead, to foresee. They could do issues like data collection on what is going to happen, or we foresee that, we have traditional systems that can read climate, for example, where people can say, oh, we are going to have lots of rain, or this drought is going to be delayed. So we see cities capturing this information and to work and try to work with civil society and communities to use them to prepare their societies better. So definitely there are a lot of practices. We've seen these practices in Kenya. We are seeing them come out in Dar es Salaam. And people are now introducing the support of newer technology, sharing, using these kinds of initiatives to grow and roll out bigger programs for wider community involvement and engagement. So yeah, there are elements, but right now the difference is that today we're trying to reinforce them with a more structured policy guided framework. Maybe you can add on that. Media would be very instrumental in terms of building partnerships for effective community mobilization and communication. Actually, we find that mayors themselves tend to gravitate towards media during their campaign times. So we are encouraging them that beyond campaign, you need to build partnerships with the media to send out these mobilization messages and provide communities with the information they need when it comes to the kind of services they need and where their contribution is expected. So definitely, if we as citizens and local governments would welcome a more proactive media agenda. There's been a tendency for media to be more of like could I call it the third or fourth estate kind of checking, So we're saying instead of being the checkmate, come in and be the person who shares and brings out the good practice so that these roles of local governments and cities in providing services, in making a better and livable environment for communities becomes more amplified, and strategic solutions can be brought onto the table when all actors are on board.
Okay, any more comment, maybe?
If I may, I think on the issue of partnership, I think there is an opportunity really to work more and more with municipalities. Somebody mentioned the role of mayors. I think they have a critical role to play in building resilience, and we know we mentioned that already. They are the ones leading on the ground, and actions cannot be successful without their participation, without them being involved. And I see already a lot of networks being involved in climate action on the ground, especially when talking to, I can mention the example of cities in Africa, that are having partnerships with other cities in other continents, sharing best practices, borrowing good example from abroad in their cities. That's, I think, is a good sign of partnership. And I see that networks like l'Association des maires francophones, the Association of African Mayors, I think it's one which can be leveraged in order to support cities, especially in Francophone Africa, to build the resilience. And we also have an institution like the United Cities and Local Governments, UCLG, which is based in Morocco, which is doing also a great work in, what they call localizing the nationally determined contributions under the Paris Agreement. And to also touch on the issue of media, I think media has, of course, an important role to play, because climate change is not just about doom and gloom. And we see that media is mostly communicating on risk, on issues, on what is going worse in the planet. But on climate action, I believe media could play an important role also in showcasing the best practices, good examples of cities building resilience. And we have a lot of examples like that, which are not known. And I think media has a role here to make them known and communicate a lot on those best practices that could be replicated in other areas. Let me also respond finally to the question, la question sur l'Afrique émergente en 2050. Moi, je pense que l'Afrique, c'est l'avenir du monde. Et aujourd'hui, on ne peut pas se passer de l'Afrique. Le potentiel est là, malgré les défis. Vous avez mentionné les défis liés au conflit armé, par exemple. Mais l'Afrique est en train de se réveiller. Le narratif sur l'Afrique est en train de changer. L'Afrique a une vision. L'Union africaine a adopté la vision 2063, l'agenda 2063. L'Afrique que nous voulons d'ici 2063. Donc, c'est une vision sur les 50 années à venir. Nous avons déjà utilisé 10 années de ces 50 ans. Et je crois qu'il est question d'appuyer cette vision pour que l'Afrique puisse émerger. Et nonobstant les défis sont nombreux, mais c'est, à mon avis, les défis sont un motif supplémentaire pour faire plus. Et l'Afrique a l'obligation de faire plus. L'Afrique a l'obligation de se développer autrement que le reste du monde. Je disais il y a quelques jours dans un panel que le reste du monde s'est développé de façon linéaire, mais l'Afrique n'est pas obligée de suivre le même modèle. Et vu que la grande partie du développement de l'Afrique est à venir, nous devons repenser ce modèle-là et le rendre beaucoup plus durable. Voilà, donc l'Afrique doit faire différemment. Et je suis sûr que nous y arriverons. Merci.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Sebastian. I think I can share a few thoughts on this. On the role of mayors, first of all, mayors are the champions for local level resilience. They're the face, and their commitment or lack of will determine how successful any initiative will be at the local level. And so with the MCR 2030 initiative, we do acknowledge this, and it actually, our engagement with any city or any local government begins with a political commitment from the mayor himself or the governor or the person leading that particular jurisdiction. On the DRR activities in East Africa, I'll only mention two. There are quite a number depending on which area you're looking at, but I'll mention two very different ones. So one is on the COVID pandemic, and how they managed, one NGO managed to increase access to information and also feedback, completing the feedback loop when it comes to COVID information, preparedness, and recovery issues. And what they did is they partnered with a community radio to translate the information into a language that is locally used, and it's Sheng. It's basically a blend of Swahili and English. I am not very fluent in it, but through this particular initiative, they're able to reach people who would never really be able to understand the information that is transmitted to the mainstream media, whether it's newspapers or TVs or and so on. So they were able to actually contextualize the information and complete the feedback loop through the engagement mechanism or the coordination mechanisms already in the villages and the small groupings within the informal settlements in Nairobi. The other example I'd give is of Kampala, a capital city, where UNDRR supported them through capacity building initiatives and planning activities, and they're able to develop a disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation strategy. And through this example, the journey that they walked through, the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development wants to scale this example up to all the other, the 9 now regional cities within Kampala, which means that it's actually a good thing that we did. On the role of media in community engagement, media generally we call it the fourth estate for a reason. It is their role to actually inform and educate us as a population, as a citizenry. Before anything else, their role is basically to inform and educate us. In the context of resilience, I would also add the aspect of accountability, because the media is the one that will capture any events when it comes to political commitment, whether it's to the Sendai Framework or the Paris Agreement. The media will have access, or they'll have the front row seats when the president is making the statements or the governor is making the statements. And they also are in a very strategic position to make sure that they're providing oversight when it comes to these political commitments and the actions that are actually made on ground. They're able to follow up and say, you know, at the next press conference, when you're talking to your mayor, you can say, yeah, we had you talk about this at a UCLG conference. What are you doing on ground? How come we're still facing this kind of challenges? And finally, on the how and where to mobilize resources, my question to you would be, what do you want these resources for? Reason being, we have been doing the Making Cities Resilient campaign for a long time, and after a decade, we actually carried out a survey to see which areas are actually the most problematic when it comes to impeding action when it comes to resilience building. And of course, financial capacity and access to financial resources and anything finance was top 3 of all answers that we received. However, when you go back and ask, so what did you want the resources for? And how much did you want? In many cases, you will not get a straight answer, because we have put it in our minds that unless we know where the money is coming from, we cannot plan for it, we cannot prioritize our needs, we cannot think of solutions that can actually solve the problems that exist. And so the major challenge to financial access, the inadequacy of financial access, is basically, it goes back to our understanding on our prioritization of what we want these resources for. And so, I mean, it's just like when a child comes to you and they say, please give me money. What are you going to ask? It's basic. How much do you want and what do you want it for? In most cases, it'll start with what do you want it for, and then how much do you want, depending on if the reason is actually making sense. And so when you're talking about access to resilience finance, we have to ask ourselves, are we presenting a business case for these resources? Because anyone who's going to give you their money has to make sure that it's actually worth investing in whatever it is that you want them to invest in. But just for the sake of, my colleague who asked this question to go out and, start looking at potential areas of accessing these resources, I'll just give you a list of possible places that you can look at. First of all, of course, key is domestic budgets. The responsibility of resilience is primarily on the state. So the state, that is national government, has the primary responsibility to ensure its citizenry are actually resilient and they're contributing to that resilience. And so domestic budgets must be contributing to this agenda, meaning then that they have to set aside specific budget lines for disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and infrastructure, resilient infrastructure developments. So find that money and let me know where you want to put it in. The second, of course, is where most of us look at, and this is international aid and donor funding. But again, we have to answer to calls for proposals, speaking to the needs that have been focused, have been prioritized by, bilateral donors or the multilateral institutions that give this kind of resources, and make sure that we have the capacities to actually plan and develop bankable projects so that our proposals actually go through. It's not submitting a proposal just because you can submit it, but submit a proposal that is actually viable or feasible. The other source I would think of is actually on climate finance, because this has a lot of visibility as well. We are talking about here, such as the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Facility that is managed by UNEP, that provide funding specifically for climate change adaptation and mitigation projects. And right now we know that in African countries, we actually have a bigger chance to access these funds to support resilience building activities, because most of our impacts are actually fall under climate change adaptation. Of course, I cannot leave out the PPPs, public-private partnerships. While yes, private sector are not quick to open their wallets to give you money, they are happy to get into collaborations that are well documented, that are well guaranteed for them to actually invest resources or to leverage their own investments through expertise or innovative finance mechanisms, but also to ensure that they're getting something back in way of incentives from national government or local government, or some tax levy relief and so on. The other, of course, is insurance and risk transfer mechanisms. We have seen, the rise of a lot of insurance products, such as the catastrophe. I hope there's someone from the World Bank who can elaborate on this. They have the catastrophe drawdown option or catastrophe bonds. We have seen now we have parametric insurance or weather-based insurance that is now transferable, that allows us to transfer risk from, say agricultural projects and so on, to ensure that we don't lose everything when we invest in such projects. We also have bonds, local bonds and national bonds on resilience, green bonds, infrastructural bonds, and so on, that allow for national and local governments to actually, tap into giving people an opportunity to invest in the resilience agenda in that jurisdiction. And this you can buy either as you're outside the country or within the country. These are actually bonds that are designed to ensure that they're able to raise resources for that. Of course, I had mentioned microfinance institutions, in informal settlements especially, but we also have community-based financial mechanisms that are able to give small loans either to individuals or communities. And we have an example in Kenya, in Homa Bay. Let me know if you want more information on this, and I'll connect you with the NGO that is running this activity, where they're actually bringing together communities for them to raise the resources for their own resilience initiatives. And of course, finally, we have national and regional banks that can give dedicated funding for resilience projects. So that's just a highlight, and I hope it has been useful to you. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you very much to you. Thank
Sebastian,
you
if I may, I'm disconnecting because I have another meeting starting. I hope it's okay with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We are running out of time, so we do have to conclude. So, from your reflections, for myself, I can't but be optimistic. There might be others ahead, but I was struck how coherent, inherently coherent the system is, and I can but wait to see the future. This is This is really unfreeing, I would say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, Sébastien. Thank you, dear Isabelle, dear Gertrude Rose. I think that we know the challenges, invest in a resilient infrastructure, have a good governance, and effective collaboration between the different actors, and above all, have with the local government effective policies about the resilience of African cities. And I think that now we can have a break, launch break, and after to another sessions about digital and the economic potential of the new continental free trade area. That's okay. So thank you for to everybody, and we come back here at 2:30 p.m. That's okay. Thank you. Thanks so much.